So, welcome to the next in our online series of messages brought to you by the folks at the Rowley Congregational Church. This is Reverend Tom Bentley, the pastor, hoping that these messages can help you in your journey of life. If you'd like to know more information about the Rowley Congregational Church, there will be some information at the end of this video. So, thank you for spending time with us. So, grace and peace to you from our friend Jesus. In philosophy and psychology, there is a prevailing point of view which says that we as human beings are born as blank slates, that there's nothing principally there before we enter into the world of awareness and consciousness. There are no innate structures or innate abilities that we have. Studies show, however, arguments that contradict this position, particularly in terms of language. Language is clearly something that is innate. It's already there. The ability to form language at our very earliest period of consciousness is there. Now, languages that are created and have been created over the eons are different. Yet the meanings and structures tend to occur in about the same way. This is fascinating. What are we? Clearly, we're predetermined in some way. In the realm of what we call religion, there's been all sorts of arguments about how much determinism there is. A generous way of understanding it, and a biblical way, is to recognize that there is a divine creative force of love in the universe. I argue that, along with this propensity for language, is the structure of love already in us. We experience that as we interact with the miracle of life, the intimacy of relationships, and ultimately the connection to this divine creative force of love that's calling us to the fullness of who we can be. When we look at the world, it's tempting to see ourselves as free, independent agents. And yes, we have many freedoms, but we don't have absolute freedom because we do have these innate determining factors in our life. Language and how we form it. We have a lot of variety within it, but we don't really have the choice. It totally is how we can construct it. And so it is with love. Love calls us to a powerful freedom, but it's really a freedom of choice. It's the freedom to choose to be an agent of love or not, to accept or deny this conscious connection to what we feel and perceive to be a divine creative force of love in the universe, driving the structures and who we are through the power of love. We can walk away from that. And maybe that feels like freedom to you. I think it's bondage to the world if you do that, the world of desperate meaninglessness. Enter instead into the purpose of what God has for you. That's the invitation. Paul made the same invitation to those Christians at Corinth who were struggling with what's happening here. They're following this loving human being, Jesus, who has this connection to this divine creative force of love, and the lives of these early Christians are being changed, and they're discovering they have certain things happen in their life, and they identify these things as spiritual gifts. Paul writes in that first letter to the Corinthians, God's various gifts are handed out everywhere, but they all originate in God's Spirit. God's various ministries are carried out everywhere, but they all originate in God's Spirit. God's various expressions of power are in action everywhere, but God Himself is behind it all. Each person is given something to do that shows who God is. Everyone gets in on it. Everyone benefits. All kinds of things are handed out by the Spirit and to all kinds of people. The variety is wonderful. Wise counsel, clear understanding, simple trust, healing the sick, miraculous acts, proclamation, distinguishing between spirits, tongues, interpretation of tongues. That's quite a list. It's not a complete list. Elsewhere in the New Testament are other spiritual gifts and the fruits of the spirits listed. Also in the Old Testament, we see references to how the Spirit of God moves within us and expresses its powerful creative love in the universe through us in certain ways, through certain gifts. We're invited to connect to those gifts. What are your gifts? Do you have any on that list? The early Christians at Corinth were confused a bit because they'd overemphasized this idea of speaking in tongues, which was speaking in a language that was unique and immediate in that moment, never heard before, and other people understood it somehow, and they felt this was an outward sign that made them somewhat superior to the others who lived out of a simpler set of gifts. Paul says, no, they're all the same. God works in mysterious and different ways, but we're all in the same power zone of love. Love is the primary source from which all of these things flow, and therefore they're made equal in the same power and purpose and meaning and value. That's the invitation in faith. Each person is given something to do that shows who God is. How have you shown that in the world? Have you had a chance to connect in that way? Have you been able to tap into this infinite source of love? Or does something hold you back? I mean, it's tempting to see ourselves as totally free, simply walking through a random set of circumstances. But no, there is some determination here. As there is with language, this love has something in mind for each of us. And as we enter into it, our gifts are manifest and known, and they're revealed in acts of grace and kindness in the world. So what are your gifts, perhaps? When we live that love that we can discover, then we live those gifts that we can find and access, unique to ourselves. That's always the invitation of the gospel. And those gifts that you have are more needed in the world today than ever before. We're asked to lean on those everlasting arms of love, receive the embrace of God's grace and forgiveness, and then be empowered to act in a loving way in the world that so needs it. So through Jesus, I offer you this invitation. And thank you for being with us. Amen and goodbye. So thank you for spending time with us. If you'd like to know more about the First Congregational Church of Rowley, you can go online at firstchurchrowley.org. And of course, we'd always like to hear from you. You can call us anytime at 978-948-3993. So peace and best wishes.